Well, good morning again, everybody. So glad you could be here with us for week 2 of our Christmas series, What If It's True? We've talked about the reality that Christmas is maybe more than any other story in all the scriptures, this fantastical, almost magical event that as we become adults, we wrestle with, like, did this really happen that way? And all these kind of things. And instead of trying to convince you for the next 3 weeks or so that Christmas is a historical event that happened, which, don't email me, I believe that. I believe that Christmas really happened. But instead of trying to convince you of that, I want to ask a deeper question in this series. I want to ask a question that I think has some juice to it, if you will. It's a question that actually changes how we live on Sunday afternoons and on Monday mornings and Thursdays at 2 p.m. I don't know why that specifically matters, but here's the question that I think the authors of the scriptures are trying to get us to wrestle with when it comes to Christmas. What does Christmas mean for us today? What's the purpose of Christmas? How does it change me and my life and how I see myself, how I see others, how I see the divine? Like, how does that all work? What does it mean for my life today? That's the question I think the authors of the Bible are actually wanting us to wrestle with. And last week, if you weren't here, we kicked things off by talking about the reality of God becoming man, leaving the splendors of heaven here to become man in this 100% God, 100% man body in Jesus. And what that means to us is that our God gets us. Christmas, if it's true, means that God understands our emotions and what we're going through, and he can connect with us through his human vulnerability. If Christmas is true, it means that this God, this Jesus, cries too, and we can relate to that. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis that I saw. I wish I would have saw this quote before I gave the sermon last week, but this is what C.S. Lewis, a great 20th century philosopher, Christian theologian, and author says: "The Son of God, Jesus, became a man to enable men to become sons of God." He became a vulnerable human, 100% God, but 100% human. And it opens up a doorway for us to live into this divine life, to become sons and daughters of God as well. And man, I'm just like, wide-eyed wonder my brain since last week, just thinking about that. But it means so much to us and how we live. Today, as we dive more into the Christmas story, I want to talk about playing hide and seek. Naturally, right? You guys play hide and seek lately? Maybe it's been a while. My house with 3 kids, 5 and under, we play a lot of hide and seek, a lot. And my son Thomas, he's 3 now. For the last maybe year and a half, he's just obsessed with either doing races around the house, ready, set, go, just chase him, or hide and seek. And can I just be real with you? We don't have to tell him this. He's terrible at it. He's really bad at hide and seek. Like, he will walk into the room that he's hiding in, and he just starts giggling because he knows I'm in there. He never wants to actually do the seeking part. He just wants to hide and be found. And so I'm like, buddy, no, now it's my turn, because now I need to go hide somewhere and take a little nap because you'll never find me. And that never actually works. But the funniest part about how bad he is at hide and seek is, like, he just thinks that if he can't see you, you can't see him. So here's a picture of him. Here's his toes right there behind a curtain in his room. He's like, Daddy will never find me, is really what he's thinking. And I'm like, oh, buddy, that's not exactly how that works, right? Christmas is a cosmic round of hide and seek. One of the powers and beauties of the Christmas story is God in search of man, leaving the splendor of heaven to come find you, to embrace you, forgive you, and welcome you into the fold of what he's doing in the world, welcome you into the fold of his family. But there's another impulse that shows up around the holidays, but it also shows up all the time in our humanity of not just wanting to be found, but it's us trying to reach after God, or reach after life beyond what we can see in our mundane existence. And this is not just a secular thing or religious thing. This is a people thing. For the longest time, people have been trying to find ways, how do I get to God, or how do I get God to get to me? There were a couple poets from the late 60s who wrote this. Robert Plant and James Patrick Page, James Patrick or Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. You guys need to listen to better music. Anyway, there's a lady who's sure. I'm not going to sing the whole thing. All that glitters is gold, and she's buying a stairway to heaven, right? If you've never heard this song, step into any music store across the country and there's a teenager in the corner who's practicing the guitar riff, right? But this song just shows this little notion or this innate human desire for us to get to God, to achieve or accumulate or climb that ladder, that stairway to get to life beyond what we experience, right? And in secular culture, we see this all the time with people that aren't in church this morning, right? Where they're trying to break through the mundane to experience more. And sometimes in culture, that's through the classic sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or maybe it's through accumulation or achievement or climbing the ladder to find ourselves higher. But there's this, I've got to get to, maybe they won't even call it God, but I've got to get to the other side to experience something more for myself. It happens all the time in our culture, but it is church and religion is not void of this notion either, you guys. And some of my responsibilities as a pastor, as a shepherd, I meet with people often, and they want to talk to me about how their spiritual life is stagnant, or they feel stuck, or they feel all alone, and they feel like they've got to do something to get into God's good graces. And so people come to me all the time and like, hey, I've just got to learn more. Help me study the Bible. I've got to understand the Bible more. Once I understand the Bible more, life is going to all click and make sense. People will come to me and they'll be like, I've got this bad habit, or I've got this sin that's dragging me down and hurting other people. I need to get over this. And so that way I can get to the other side, and then God will be happy with me, or I'll be living in rhythm with God. Sometimes people will look me in the eyes and they'll promise me, Joel, I'm going to be at church 52 weeks this year. And that's when I love to tell them we only have service 50 of the 52 weeks. But I'm never going to miss church again. And I know that when I commit to come to church, everything's going to move smooth in my life, and God's going to get to me, and I'm going to get God in a new way. Now hear me. All those things are really great things. Like to get God's story in us, to study the scriptures, like that is such a powerful, life-changing thing. To walk away from destructive patterns that hurt us and other of God's children, like that is a beautiful step in our lives. And coming to church, I think it's good for you, and I don't care who knows it, with the guy with the politician thumb telling you right now. I don't care, right? Like, it's great for you. It's a beautiful thing, and I love it. But when we focus only on ways that we can get to God, or we get God to come into our lives, man, we miss some of the beauty and some of the power of the Christmas story from the very, very beginning. Because Christmas is ultimately a story of God seeking after you and finding you wherever you are, in your mess, in the muck of life. He's finding you. And life's going to begin to make more sense when you are satisfied to simply be found and let your life change from that reality instead of trying to change your life to get God to do something. So what I want to do today is I want to take a look at a passage in the Gospels, the Gospel of John, his Christmas narrative. And then we're going to look at the ways in the world that Jesus was born into, people got this thing backward, where they were trying to make the move towards God and not waiting for him to make the first move to them. Then we're going to find ourselves in this story. And it's going to be challenging, and we're probably all going to feel uncomfortable together. But this is where I want to take us this morning, because I think it's going to help us see Christmas in a whole new light. So let's start with the Gospels. There are 4 Gospels at the beginning of our New Testament. Gospels are it's not an autobiography either. It's a biography, ancient biography of Jesus' life. There are 4 of them. Did I get through that? Okay. 4 ancient biographies of Jesus' life. We got Matthew and Luke, who give us tedious details about Jesus' birth and about the very first Christmas. We have the Gospel of Mark that skips over it completely. It's like, let's get down to business. Did I Mulan reference? Okay, anyway. It just goes right to Jesus teaching and preaching about the kingdom of God. And then we get the Gospel of John. And John's different than all the other Gospels in lots of different ways. Let's just say it's built different. He sees the world differently. I found this meme that really explains the 3 Gospels and then John's Gospel. It's just different. John's Gospel. John, yeah, okay, I see what you know. But anyway, it's like colorful. And John, he actually tells the Christmas story through a poem. And through like this beautiful flowery language with like thundering theology behind it. So I want to take us to John's Christmas story this morning. He begins his gospel all the way back at the beginning. John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, for the longest time growing up, I thought when John was talking about the Word, I thought he was talking about the Bible, because in church we talk about the Word of God, the Bible, this whole thing. But the Bible wasn't compiled together until the end of the 4th century. John's talking about something else. John, when he says the word, it's actually the Greek word logos. And logos was this water cooler philosophical conversation at the time that Jesus entered into the human story. And people are like, what is the logos? And the logos, this word in their ancient mind was, what's the thing underneath of everything? What's the foundation of logic and science and math and life and love? What's the thing holding the universe together? And everybody had all these different answers to that question. But John answers the question with it's Jesus is the Logos. He is the Word. He says, in the beginning was the Word, Logos, Jesus, and the Word was with God. So he's with God the Father, the Son is, and the Word was God. He makes this mind-blowing statement that Jesus isn't just a nice guy or someone used by God, but he is God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. He's making this epic statement about who Jesus is, the Logos, the Word of God. Jesus, the Son. He continues on the next couple of verses and says this. In him, in Jesus, was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. One of the themes that John riffs on over and over again is light and life. And he says that true life is found in Jesus. And this life is almost like a light to all things. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And one translation of overcome says that the darkness is confounded by it or confused by it. It's playing on a whole different level. And then he talks specifically about Christmas. And he says the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Jesus, the light and life and logos of all creation, is coming into the world to illuminate and disperse the darkness. Where I want to take us next is to see the kind of darkness that was spreading in that first century world and that very first Christmas. What was going on in the ground? What kind of darkness were God's people experiencing in the first century that Jesus brought light to? And to go there, we have to look a little bit at world history. So for the next 7 to 10 minutes, we're going to go through a journey of history. And I know some of you are like, yeah, and that's like 3 of you. The rest of you are like, oh, get to the point. But trust me, follow me. We're all going to go together. It's going to make sense. It's going to connect all together. And we're going to find ourselves in this story. But 300 years before Jesus was born, there was a great world leader that the world had never seen the likes of before. And he looked like this, just with a whole body as well. But this is Alexander the Great. You may have heard of him. He was great, as they say. How do you get that just as your name, right? But he got this moniker, this greatness thing attached to him because he conquered most of the civilized and uncivilized world around the Middle East and all the way through Europe with the Greco-Roman Empire and the Greco-Roman movement militarily. But what makes Alexander so unique and fascinating to me is that he didn't come wielding a sword alone. It wasn't just our military is going to be the biggest, baddest thing, you should be afraid of it. Alexander the Great had a gospel. He had a message. Gospel just means good news. And Alexander the Great's message, his good news, his gospel was Hellenism is here for you. So join the good guys. Join Team Hellenism. Alexander the Great came into town not just wielding a sword and military might, but a worldview, a way to see the world, a vision of society that everyone was welcomed into. And it was called Hellenism. Hellenism, it was this way of seeing the world. It's summed up in this poet's quote here. Protagoras said, man is the measure of all things. In a world where everybody had their own lowercase g gods and goddesses and everybody was looking to the skies to give them everything, Hellenism said that no longer are the gods the center of the universe, but man is the center of the universe and man is the measure of all things. Hellenism said, hey, this is about me, myself, and I. We don't live in a culture like Hellenism at all, do we, right? We can just move on. We don't have any of our marketing telling us things like, BK, have it your way, you rule. Or even back in the 60s with Frank Sinatra saying, I did it. Wow. That was louder than you sang worship this morning. What is that about? We don't find shopping trips for ourselves, do some retail therapy and say, treat yourself. We have no idea what this is like, right? But this way of Hellenism back then and today creeps into our worldview, into our minds, and it causes a darkness around us, even though on the surface, man, it looks and feels amazing. There were 4 pillars of Hellenism that Alexander the Great brought to the world that Jesus was born into. First was education. Understand that if you can teach people certain things, it will control the way that they think. And so there were lots of fights about education. We don't have any idea what that's like today at all, right? But the idea of that everybody wanted to better themselves, and we're going to give them public education, ways that they can learn in these ancient, they called them gymnasiums, but they're more like universities. Moved on, another pillar was healthcare, that we wanted to take care of people. First time in human history in Alexander the Great's Hellenism were their public tax dollars used for hospitals. This is called an ancient Asclepion around the place where Jesus was born, which had hot springs, and doctors would meet there and they would heal people and make people feel better. Understanding that, hey, if we're going to control people and get people to buy into our worldview, we've got to take care of their physical bodies. Entertainment. This is the first time in the world history where we saw theater and the arts rise to the top of a society, where people would go see plays and they would have their characters and these storylines that they would love to witness. This was their entire form of entertainment. Again, we are not an entertainment culture at all, right? We have no idea. We weren't up way too late binging something last night, right? But this was the world of Hellenism. And then lastly, athletics. I think this picture was taken from CrossFit Galilee. They would just push heavy things and then post about it on social media. But athletics was a huge deal, not only for the bettering of their bodies, but competition and tribal identities that happened with our team versus their team was a huge part of it, where enemies were made through competition. Like this is our world, right? Just a couple weeks ago, when the Wolverines took care of the Buckeyes, and there was the whole, yes, thank you, like 6 little, oh, yes. And the whole thing with the flag, and both schools have been like fined $100,000, and these people vehemently hate each other, and like they're just kids throwing a football and running into each other, right? But like athletics is a huge part of our world today. This world of Hellenism is our world today in so many different ways. Which brings it back to, how do we respond to it? And how did they respond to this whole new worldview of Hellenism that was threatening a worldview that was God-centric and threatening a worldview where it was the story of God's people-centric, for sure. And we see, just like we have to respond today, the ancient people that were devoted to the ways of God had to respond to Hellenism as well. And they had to look at these things. And of course, these things were not like good or bad. They were neutral. It depends on who they were in the hands of, right? But they had to respond to the way that Hellenism had shaped their world. And I just find it so fascinating that this is all happening at the time that Jesus is born. There are 3 groups of devoted God followers who respond to this in different ways. First, we have a group of people called the Zealots. They were called the Zealots because they had zeal for God. They were very passionate about the way of God and the kingdom of God. And they believed that the way that they got to God, or the way that God came to them, is they had to eliminate the enemies of God. And so they practiced the ways of the enemies of God. They were violent. They were known for having these little daggers on them called sicarios. And they would have these little shanks on them that they would go into crowds, and if they saw anybody who was part of the Greco-Roman ruling class, they would stab them like straight prison shank style. And they were doing it in the name of Jesus. They were doing it in the name of God. And they thought, this is how we're supposed to live. This is how God's kingdom comes, is that we've got to kick some butt and take some names and get our ruling back. They were passionate, but they were violent. Another group of people were called the Herodians. And the Herodians were devout followers of God, but they like to have their cake and they like to eat the ways of culture too. They had some money, they had some wealth, and all of the beautiful things of Hellenism, they would like to have those as well. And so they were in the middle of culture and the cultural conversations, and understood all the plays and understood all that was going on in the healthcare conversation. And they were going to, the place where they would work out and do all these things in Hellenism, but they would also like to go to temple. They were in the middle of culture, but they weren't feeling like they had to do anything at all, just like let it take its course. Let it take its course. That's what it said to Hellenism. Another group of people, know about these a lot. We hear about these a lot in our New Testament. These are the Pharisees. And the Pharisees get a bad rap, and for plenty of reason, because Jesus has such harsh criticisms for them. But Pharisees, in their worldview, they were devout Jewish followers of God who took the Bible so seriously, they wanted to live it to the letter of the law, because in their worldview, they thought if we were completely obedient, then we would get to God and God's kingdom would come to us. So in the face of the darkness of Hellenism coming and crashing into the world, Pharisees thought we've got to be completely obedient and make sure everybody around us knows they need to be obedient so that we get to God and we see God and God comes to us the way that we need him. And with each groups of these people, the Herodians, the Zealots, and the Pharisees, there were actually strengths and weaknesses to each group. So I want to put this up. And I want us to start to consider in the way that we live in our lives today, the way that we deal with a culture that's different than what we believe that God says it should be, and the way that we deal with the darkness in our own lives, how do we begin to respond? I want us to start to see ourselves in this. But there was a strength and weakness to each one of these responses to Hellenism. Like the strength to the Zealots was that they were passionate. They believed that God called them to do something with their faith, and God wanted them to be a part of a solution to a dark and broken world. That was a very positive thing about the Zealots. But they had a glaring weakness as well, right? They believed in the lie of redemptive violence. They believed that they could play by Alexander the Great's rules and still get results like King Jesus. And it just doesn't work that way. So I wondered, do you actually resonate with the Zealots some? Because I do. And I'm not like shanking people on the way to Starbucks or anything like that, but like to the values underneath of the Zealots. There's so many things that I find myself having in common with them. For example, like sometimes, I'm more drawn to defending Jesus than I am representing Jesus. Does that make sense? Like this plays out for me a lot online when I see somebody, saying something about faith or about church or about Jesus or about Christians. I just want to be a keyboard warrior. I want to dive right in. I want to be the guy who goes, well, actually, in the 4th century, nobody likes that guy. Come on. And if I can be honest, like so often the impulse when I want to stand in and defend Christianity or defend Jesus or the church, that impulse is not righteousness, but it's pride, and it makes me feel good to make somebody else feel dumb. And that's the ugliest part of me. Zealots, we can get caught up in the culture wars. We can get caught up in being more interested in defending Jesus and representing Jesus. We get caught up in using methods for Jesus that are nothing like Jesus. I wonder, do you connect with these guys at all? And how you try to get to God and live out God's way. Next, we have the Herodians, and their strength was they were cultured. They were right at the crossroads of the earth where they understood all the references to the movies. They understood all the songs that were being sung and the plays that were all over the place. And they understood art and the value that it had in this culture. They're right in the middle of it. And this matters because God cares about culture, because culture is made up of people that God loves. They are positioned to do amazing things in the culture because they're in the culture. But their great weakness is compromise. Their great weakness is they never evaluate their relationship inside of the culture. They just go with the flow. They never question like, oh, should I be watching this, listening to this, or does this produce the fruit of the Spirit in me, or is this just what everybody else is doing? Herodians compromise because in a season like Christmas that's been co-opted by consumerism, we just go along with the flow and we buy and we consume and we create this I'll take it and throw it away type of culture. And man, can I just be real with you? I am so Herodian. I'm not throwing stones this morning. I'm so Herodian so often. Like, I love watching the latest show that everybody's talking about. I love being on the inside conversation of, oh, did you see this documentary? Martha Stewart, oh my gosh. Like, I love like that kind of thing. And I love technology. Like, I love my whole Apple ecosystem, Apple Watch, iPhone, iPad, MacBook, I think it's a MacBook Air, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not even on Spotify Wrapped. I'm on Apple Music because I like it all to tie together. I love that stuff. But I wonder sometimes if our consumerism, just going with the flow culture, man, it speaks a different story than the story that God's called me to live. It's a very Herodian story where we compromise this story that's all about the other and self-sacrifice and generosity and radical hospitality. Maybe we sacrifice that story for, ooh, that's nice. I like that. I haven't had a new Apple Watch in a couple years. They probably made some updates. Maybe that's just me, but maybe you connect with them. Then we have the Pharisees. And the Pharisees had a great gift to the world for all of the crap they get from church people today and all the rough stuff that Jesus said about them. They had a great gift that was obedience. They took God seriously. They took his word seriously. They wanted to live in obedience to him. And that's a great thing. It's a great thing that's often lacking in our modern Christianity today. But there was an ugly side to their obedience. Sometimes their obedience played out as a lack of humility and a lack of compassion, to where they would just walk around puffed up chest because, oh, they don't know that yet, or, oh, I'm more spiritual than they are, and, oh, compassion, oh, they just need to get it together. Don't they know that by now? Don't they need to stop doing that by now? Oh, they're so unhealthy. Oh, they're so this. And this is the kind of stuff that Jesus railed about. And this is the deficit, the weakness of our own Pharisaical mindset and worldview. Let me ask you this, like, do you recognize any of yourself in the Pharisees? Because, oh, I do. And, oh, I hate it, but it's there. I like to say that in the story of the prodigal son, I'm a recovering older brother in that story, which is not helpful that I am an older brother, I guess, as well. But I'm really good at knowing what other people need to be doing. Really good. You should try me sometime. I'm really good at it. And sometimes I can be so judgmental and so prideful about where I am compared to other people. And it's the ugliest part of Joel. I wonder, do you relate with that either? I think the longer you're in church, the longer you're a church person, oh man, I think we should recognize ourselves in the Pharisees. I think this is our challenge. Because we think we're going to get to God by looking better than other people. Where do you find yourself here? Which group or groups do you resonate with the most? Maybe it's not like a one for one, but you're like, oh, I don't like that. Yeah. I like to play by the world's rules. I like to own some people online. I like to make them feel dumb. Yeah, maybe it's there. You want to fight back. Maybe Herodian, like you like your stuff, but you never question what your stuff and what your accumulation means to your allegiance to Jesus. Or maybe Pharisees, like you're so harsh towards others. It's amazing what we can do as Pharisees sometimes, to where we want to ask for forgiveness from other people, but man, we never offer forgiveness first to them. Maybe you see yourself there. Maybe it's a combination of three. Wherever you find yourself this morning, here's the good news of Christmas that I want us to hold on to today. Is wherever you find yourself trying to get to God or do the God thing right or get him to come to you, whatever you do to climb that ladder, that stairway, Jesus comes to you and he reminds you that he makes the first move. And his first move changes your response, that second move. Wherever you are this morning, Jesus finds you right where you are and he reminds you that he makes the first move to you. So just be found this Christmas. A couple implications, whatever group you find yourself in. The first one, this. If Christmas is true, you guys, if this really is true, that God makes the first move to zealots, to those who are full of passion and vinegar. I almost said something else. That was dangerous. They're full of passion and they're like ready to get in the action and do something about the world. But they like to play by the world's rules and they like to fight back and win. Here's the reality. That Jesus comes as a Prince of Peace, not wielding a sword to strike others down, but by offering his own life. Jesus comes as a Prince of Peace, wielding peace, bringing peace, and he doesn't bring peace by eliminating enemies with violence. He does it by wooing us with his love. This is who Jesus is. Maybe for you, if you fall into the zealot category today, maybe you need to be reminded that God's ways of bringing his kingdom, they actually work. And you don't need to resort to the ways of the world, the ways of our culture, the dog-eat-dog reality to be a part of what God is doing because he is the Prince of Peace. Sometimes we love to sing about the Prince of Peace and we love Jesus as the Prince of Peace, but we forget our role as Jesus followers is to follow the Prince of Peace, to shadow step him, to be people that bring peace into chaos. And Jesus' first move to you is to remind you that he is the Prince of Peace, so follow him. Maybe here this morning, and you find yourself in that Herodian worldview, and this is what the implication for you. If Christmas is true, you guys, God makes the first move to Herodians, to those who like our stuff and we like everything about our culture. And we like to have our God too. We like to sprinkle that in on Sundays, you know what I mean? Like kind of thing. But here's the reality, you guys. This is where Jesus finds you and has first moved to you. Jesus comes as the newborn king. And he's worthy of your full allegiance. I'm reminded of the quote from Pastor Tony Evans, who said that Jesus came not to take sides, but to come and take over. This is the reality of Christmas, that his move to you, his first move to you, is to say that he is the king. Which begs the question, if you're like me and you wrestle with this Herodian worldview sometimes, whose kingdom are you lining up with? Just the kingdom of culture or the kingdom of Jesus? Does your heart beat for the things of Christ or just our consumer culture? The first move that Jesus makes to you, if you struggle with this reaction to the darkness, is to just give your full allegiance to King Jesus, who is so worthy of it. And be reminded that this king did not come wielding a sword, remember, but he came by giving up his own life. And this king and his kindness is what draws us to him. But where I want to spend the rest of our time today is that other worldview, that other reality that I think many times we try to get to God through this Pharisaical worldview. And here's the implication. If Christmas is true, God makes the first move to Pharisees. Now, there's a couple of ways that this Pharisee worldview, it seeps into my heart, it seeps into the church. And I want to speak to both of these realities this morning. First, sometimes in our lives trying to live as functional Pharisees, sometimes we think that we get God's embrace by behavior modification. We think I've got to do this, I've got to achieve this, I've got to get to church 3 weeks in a row and I got to be there on time. I got to sing with my eyes closed and lift my hand this high this week and next week a little bit higher. It's all about growth, right? We think we got to do things for God to embrace us. In our search of getting to God, we white knuckle our behavior thinking, I'm not going to do this bad thing, I'm not going to do this bad thing, not going to do this bad thing, even though our focus is on that and we don't actually embrace the good that God has for us. And you know what? One of the main ways we can live in this behavior modification worldview is actually inside of the walls of church. I've heard it said before that religion is the safest place to hide from the living God. Isn't it true that we can be going through all the religious motions, but we can be hiding from the living God who wants to change us from the inside out? Sometimes we think behavior modification is the way that we get into God's good graces, we get with God, but there's the other side of it too. The other side of this Pharisaical worldview says that I'm just going to be running from God. I'm done with God because I can't be good enough. I'm not enough. So I'm exhausted from trying to measure up to these super Christians. I'm exhausted trying to measure up to those people that it looks like they feel something and I don't feel something. And you're just so exhausted from your own brokenness and just disillusioned, man. And you just feel like there's no need to try. And maybe you're not calling yourself a Pharisee, but you're thinking that God works in this Pharisaical worldview, and you're just not ever going to be good enough. My brothers and sisters, man, come on. This is what's true. That God makes the first move to you. He comes to you as you are in your mess. You don't have to clean yourself up. You don't have to change anything. You are loved in this instant, in this moment, fully. You know, make matters even more radical is that God knows you completely and loves you fully right here and right now, whatever mess you're carrying. So if you think you've got to clean yourself up this Christmas, you've got to do some things to climb the ladder to get into God's good graces, stop it. God doesn't play by those rules. He comes to you as you are and loves you just as you are in your mess. And if we talk about change and how change actually occurs, we think so often we've got to change and then God loves us. But the first move always comes from Jesus, you guys. And we just respond to that first move. This is what's also true. Jesus' forgiveness and embrace is always the first move. You don't change and then God embraces you. You don't change and then God forgives you. God forgives you and embraces you. And it's in that grace that true lasting change actually occurs. True lasting change in your life and in my life only comes when we live from grace, not for grace. True lasting change only comes when we live from a place of receiving grace, not in a place of trying to receive or get grace from God. One of my favorite sentences pinned in all of the Bible, Paul's writing to a group of Jesus followers in Romans and says this, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, while we were still sinners." He demonstrates, he shows us, he gives out his love to us. And he shows us in this, while we were still sinners. Was it after we cleaned ourselves up? Is it after we stopped doing that thing or started doing this thing? No, while we were still sinners, just as we were in our broken state, he loved us. Christ died for us. This is the gospel. This is good news. And I've just got to get a little bit of a sidebar here, and I'm going to take this very carefully. It's Christmas time. And in our family, you can judge us all you want. We do Santa. Santa's a part of our kids' Christmas, and we love it. We celebrate. Santa comes to our house, let's put it that way. But there's some danger if we don't walk Christmas carefully with the message of Jesus in Christmas as well. You better watch out. You better not cry. Sorry, it's not going to be in tune with that. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. You want to make sure you're on the nice list, not the naughty list, right? And then you're going to get something. Let's be careful, parents, grandparents, not to mix the Santa rule with the Jesus rule. Because whether you're on the naughty list, the nice list, some would argue we're all on the naughty list kind of thing, Jesus is still coming for you, and nothing changes his grace for you. Because while we were yet sinners, while we were still sinners, Jesus came to us. That's the kind of Christmas message I want my kids to hear. And I want them to listen to. I want that too. Maybe in this cosmic game of hide and seek, maybe my son Thomas, who always wants to be the one hiding and be found, maybe he's got it right. Maybe that's the posture that I need to have more, and the posture that we're all invited into more, is just to be found and let lasting change come from that wondrous moment. Because Christmas is about God reaching out to you and finding you no matter where you are, what you've done. God is always the seeker, and he meets you right there. You guys, what if this is all true? Even if you struggle to believe it and you got a million questions, don't you wish it was true? That this God makes the first move to you always, and you don't need to climb that stairway to heaven. You don't need to go and get God, but Christmas is a story of him coming to get you. I long for it to be true. I believe it to be true. I hope you do too.